red crosshairs drifted over the Orion's strong outline. One of the heavier autocannons hammered armor into dust on the mech's right arm. The first of the small ones chipped armor over the Orion's right hip. The only laser in the other small autocannon hit the right flank, sending armor sheeting away to smoke on the ground. The Orion retaliated and did so in a devastating manner. The SRMs all missed, but the autocannon finally tracked true. A hail of depleted uranium shells pulverized the armor on Patrick's right flank. Warning lights flashed in the cockpit. The armor was down to less than 7% coverage. The crowd reacted with an eager rumble, knowing the fight was all but over. Not the way the smart money bets, page 158 by Michael A. Stackpole. The early days of BattleMech production were a gold rush for the armament companies that served the states of the Inner Sphere. The most profitable and substantial contracts went to the companies that could quickly take advantage of the scramble for functioning or mostly functioning battlemechs to fill the ranks of both house militaries and the hegemony armed forces. With the Mackie being a success and other mechs like the Archer and Griffin being produced to meet specific battlefield needs, General Mechanics based out of Mars sought to create a battlemech which could fill a niche for a heavy frontline assaulter. By 2453, after some false starts, GM had cobbled together a machine designated the ON-1H Orion, which had met many of the design specs presented by the hegemony armed forces. There was one previous iteration of the mech designated the ON-1C Orion, but it was a non-starter according to the records because it could only carry an AC-5 autocannon and 2 medium lasers due to its larger engine size. The Orion 1H was dominated by primitive parts which limited the mech's performance in comparison to its later improved versions. But these early mechs had to crawl so that the later mechs could run. The 270 primitive fusion engine limited the Orion 1H to just 54 km per hour or a 350 movement profile. This matched the Mackie and the Banshee, which were comparables at the time. The bad news continues as the primitive armor, cockpit, and weaponry weigh down this early Orion considerably. The 1H was armed with a prototype AC-10 autocannon in the right torso, which was fed by 2 tons of ammunition in that side. The mech sported 2 LRM-5s placed into the left torso to give the mech some long-range weaponry, and they were fed by just a single ton of ammunition. For close-range conflict resolution, a short-range missile forelauncher was added to the left arm, fed by a ton of ammunition in the left torso. Finally, 2 standard medium lasers were added, split between the right arm and left arm, to complete the loadout. Thankfully, the HAF was impressed enough to order the prototype into production. The first units weren't even off the line before the hegemony brass were pushing for more. The scale of the operation would leave a Succession Wars logistics officer in awe as entire companies of Orion 1Hs were delivered to HAF armies. GM worked with a dozen different companies to keep the raw materials and parts flowing at a frantic pace. These were the good old days of battlemech production, and General Mechanics was going to make the most of them. Though obviously the ON-1H Orion would evolve over time to a machine we'd better know and love, it's always nice to see how different the cutting edge was back in the 25th and 26th centuries. As a member of one of the first generation of battlemechs, the Orion would see action across the Inner Sphere and into the periphery as a result of the Periphery Wars and later Ameris Civil War, the latter being where the mech had the opportunity to end up a household name. Inner view screen, the Orion reeled under the thermic and kinetic impact of the twin particle streams. Though most clan designers gave no thought to aesthetics when drawing up new mech plans, Hang Meta thought the Inner Sphere machine truly ugly in appearance. It had a box-shaped torso, a pair of gangly legs, and an off-center cockpit between high, hunched shoulders. The left arm boasted a cylindrical missile launcher, while the right ended in a laser's focusing head. From the Orion's right side projected the muzzle of an autocannon, a weapon the enemy pilot was even now bringing in line with Meta's cockpit. Shadow of War, page 147, by Thomas S. Gressman. One of the benefits of being in that early pantheon of battlemechs was that techs had the opportunity to work out a lot of quirks and kinks in the design over the decades. When the ON-1K Orion was finally introduced in 2570, one of the selling bullet points was easy maintenance. Swapping out crummy or broken parts was easy, and replacements were plentiful during those good years. The ON-1K benefited from the evolving technologies that would become the standard for battlemechs during the Star League and later Succession Wars. The Kallio chassis was roomy and could easily support the 75-ton mech's equipment. The Vlar 300 fusion engine pushed the Orion's top speed to 64 km per hour, which put it on par with its peers in the heavyweight class. The 14.5 tons of standard plate armor offered 231 points of protection, and that put it well beyond its peers at the 75-ton mass point. The Hammerhands, for example, only carried 11.5 tons of armor, and the Flashman carried just 13.5. Even the venerable Marauder 3R was protected by just 11.5 tons of Valiant armor. The long and short of it is that the Orion was well protected from incoming fire, and that supported the goal of creating a frontline heavy mech that could survive a charge across an open field. Ideally, naked, painted blue, and filled with ale. The Mechwarrior, not the mech. Mechs are already naked. Sheesh. What was left after adding all the unimportant things like a cockpit, gyro, and 10 single heat sinks was 28 tons of mass dedicated to weaponry. The Orion 1K's primary weapons were a Kallio Class 10 autocannon located in the mech's right torso, and a Kallio Death Bloom Missile System 15 placed into the left torso. The Kallio brand name is important because as we march down the timeline, construction of new Orions was split between Kallio Weapons Industries on Kendall and Alphard Trading Corporation based out of Kalidasa. Both of these planets were long-time holdings of the Free Worlds League, though on opposite sides of their domain. These two companies would end up in a long-term partnership spanning the Succession Wars and into later eras. The AC-10 autocannon was fed by 2 tons of ammunition, which was plenty for all but the longest of engagements, and it could be reliably fired without significant heat buildup. The LRM-15 in the left torso gave the mech considerable long-range punch, acting as either fire support or just adding to the chaos on the march into closer combat. He was given 2 tons of ammunition in the left torso. Once the Orion closed in on its target, it could unleash its IWW-branded SRM 4-pack and 2 standard IWW medium lasers. What the ON-1K Orion lacked in flashy big-hitting weapons, it made up for in volume of fire. The combination of lasers, missiles, and moderate-sized autocannon allowed the Orion to burn down opponents in a slugfest where the 14.5 tons of armor could help the mech outlast its opponents. Heat generation is a slight issue, but only when really going on a target at close range. The other issue is one shared by many of the 1K's Succession War peers. I think we can all say it together. 1, 2, 3, lack of webbed toes. No wait. I meant to say placement of ammunition in torsos without case. While not a critical flaw, I have to be fair, so it gets the same disclaimer that the other 3025 battlemechs have gotten. They're clearly imperfect creatures by nature of their place on the timeline. Initially, that limitation was the emerging battlemech technology. Later, it was the loss of that technology know-how as a result of the Succession Wars. But we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. In the years following its first construction, the ON-1K Orion was quite popular among those who were blessed enough to field the mech, and feared by those who had to try to take it down. Over the course of its more than 500 years of service across all of the great houses and in the periphery, the Orion proved its mettle over and over again. Perhaps the best demonstration of the Orion's value is that Alexander Kerensky himself chose it for his personal battlemech. Of course, it received more than its fair share of upgrades, but the mech is still the mech. When the SLDF fought its way through Ameris' defensive lines around Terra, it was Kerensky in his Orion which finally kicked down the gates of the palace and officially ended Ameris' reign of terror. I suppose we have to talk about the Kerensky refit of the ON-1K, even though I've always felt it very out of the timeline for me for all the same reasons why I generally dislike the royal refits of the other battlemechs. It's a great build, and it makes most of the other variants of the Orion look pretty shoddy in comparison. That is unfortunate. The 2753 Kerensky Orion received an upgrade to 13 tons of ferrofibrous armor, which maxes out the possible protection on a 75-ton battlemech. Its 10 heatsinks were swapped with a double variety, and case was installed into the right torso. In that right torso, a Gauss rifle was installed along with 2 tons of ammunition. The SRM-4, aided by an Artemis 4 fire control system in the left torso, was fed by a single ton of ammunition also stored in the case-protected right torso. A snub-nosed PPC joined the SRM-4 in the left torso, and finally a pair of standard medium lasers were split between the left and right arms. The Kerensky refit for the Orion is very heat efficient, and the advantages it would have over other standard mechs at the time are obvious. The accuracy of the snub-nosed PPC mixed with the power and range of the Gauss rifle would be absolutely devastating. It's a great mech, just don't let it sully our opinions for the other later variants, okay? That is the path of suffering, despair, and forgetting to cancel an unwanted subscription service that renews for an entire year. If you haven't had the opportunity to read the account of that final battle on Terra in the Liberation of Terra Book 2, I would recommend it. With Kerensky at the head of the 26th Royal Battlemech Division, he saw firsthand just how willing Amaris and his supporters were to destroy anything and everything in order to prolong the inevitable. The pointless destruction of cultural and historically significant sites across Unity City was widespread and merciless. It's said that General Kerensky was moved to tears at the sight of the destruction Amaris had brought to Terra. It's a rarely discussed aspect of the story of the fall of the Star League in that in many ways these were broken people within a dying system. I've heard some people call Kerensky a coward for organizing the Exodus, but after what he and the SLDF went through to get to the point where the House Lords were willing to throw it all away had to be soul-crushing. It's something to consider. The last hopes of the enduring Amaris Empire had crumbled with the sight of the Devil Kerensky, as Amaris had years previously taken to calling the General, smashing through the Imperial Palace gate in his Orion. The guards within the palace itself dropped their weapons and surrendered to Kerensky, who called in the 26th Infantry to clear the building of any potential surprises. BattleTech, Historical Liberation of Terra 2, page 107. Written by Chris Hartford and Christopher Trosson. Though Kerensky was not able to bring his Orion with him on the exodus from the Inner Sphere, the mech did make a reappearance, this time as a gift to Theodore Kurita in 3018. The Orion was practically a shell, all its important parts removed or ruined. I could not offer such an empty gift, however. The mech has been refitted by the finest technicians in the Combine and with the best equipment, including some brought from the Free Worlds League factory that is the last one in the sphere still producing Orions. "This is too great a gift," Theodore said, holding the manual out for Florimel. "I cannot accept it." Florimel ignored his outstretched hand. "In my eyes, you have earned it." Heir to the Dragon, page 61, by Robert N. Charette. Theodore renamed the mech Revenant, and it ended up holding its own during the Fourth Succession War. Though he was forced to ultimately sacrifice the mech, the Revenant cockpit was salvaged as a priceless historical artifact. It sat in a BattleMech museum on Solaris 7 for the next century until a galaxy from the newly formed Scorpion Empire jumped into the system to challenge the Wolf Empire for it. The Scorpions won the trial and carted off the Orion cockpit to its likely new home in the fledgling Periphery Empire. As previously mentioned, the record from the Orion is stellar. Though the largest concentration of the mech was found logically close to its production centers in the Free Worlds League, the mech could be found far and wide across the Inner Sphere. Being so rugged and durable, the Orion was able to sustain its presence throughout the Succession Wars, even if the days of entire companies of Orions crashing into enemy forces were in the rearview mirror. The Zeus toppled in a hail of explosions, while the Warhammer that had struck the craft rocked back as it took a heavy laser strike to its cockpit. The other two mechs, a Hunchback and a Griffin, took only minor damage, but turned their attention away from Ryan. It was the break the pirate needed. Resuming his retreat, Ryan tied all of his weapons together and centered on the Hunchback. A hail of missile and autocannon fire ripped into the mech's right arm, tearing it clean from the body. The mech staggered but kept its footing as it turned its back to Ryan. The Griffin tried to avenge his partner, but his particle cannon shot wide left, while a decade of missiles exploded harmlessly around the Orion's feet. Ryan backed around the side of a small hill, which put him out of sight of the enemy mechs. Unholy Union, page 76 and 77, by Chris Husey, Counterattack Battlecore Anthology Volume 5. As well as the Orion 1K performed, there were attempts to refine and improve upon the build over the years. Besides the Superstar Kerensky variant, the first officially designated variant of the Orion was the 1V, spotted first in 2799. Surprisingly, it pulled 3 tons of armor from the Orion in order to add a second SRM-4 and an additional ton of ammunition for the launchers. Of all the mech variants out there, this sure is one of them. While I am willing to concede there is probably someone out there who can make a compelling argument for why dropping 20% of your battle mech's armor for a shot with an SRM-4 is a great idea, any attempt to do so will likely make my eyes glaze over. It's true it makes the mech more powerful, but at what cost? At what cost? Apparently, the in-universe debut for the Orion 1V went over like a lead balloon, as apparently the variant needed to be retrofitted quickly to remove the LRM-15, as the Orion's computer couldn't handle the third missile launcher. This refit, designated the Orion 1VA, pulled that launcher and its ammo and boosted the armor back up to its original 14.5 tons. It also carried 6 additional heat sinks. Every once in a while I forget just how heavy the Inner Sphere Tech LRM launchers are, and I'm surprised at what you can do with the mass once you pull one of them out of a mech. The Orion 1VA was a solid short-range brawler, though more than a few complained about the lack of a long-range firepower. The heat sinks were more than enough to handle the consistent short-range fire, only generating +1 heat into the red, alpha striking while on the run. With savvy deployment and careful concealment until it can get close, the Orion 1VA was a dangerous early succession war brawler. Before we step away from the V-line of Orions, there was one more entry which was worth noting because the Orion has a history of being used as a command mech. The Orion 1V DC was essentially the same build as the Orion 1V, except that the second ton of SRM-4 ammunition was sacrificed so that a command console cockpit could be added to the head. I couldn't find any information on if they fixed the missile launcher computer issue or not. Buyer beware with those missile gremlins. The Warhammer's PPC spat lightning. An enemy Orion lumbered in from his blind side, the autocannon tucked under its right arm, hammering furiously at the stricken rebel mech. Grayson shifted his aim to the Orion, sending bolt after blue-tinged bolt of laser fire into the mech's side. The volume of fire striking his Shadowhawk from the wall and from Kuritan mechs was so great now that his computer was threatening total shutdown as the mech's internal heat continued to rise. Mercenaries Star, page 227, by William H. Keith. The next official variant for our beloved Orion wouldn't hit the scene until 3049, and it is our Helm Memory Core upgraded version. Since the collapse of the Star League, the production of new Orions had been in the hands of Kaliyama within the Free Worlds League. This new variant, designated the ON-1M, was the result of high demand to improve upon the already popular battlemech. Both of the production lines on Kendall and Kalidasa were reorganized to produce the ON-1M, which would quickly become the default for newly produced Orions. The most substantial structural change for the 1M was a swap over to a Hermes 300XL fusion engine. While it did shave off 9.5 tons of mass from the battlemech, it did so at the cost of increased vulnerability with 3 engine critical hits on each side torso. The M's 11 heatsinks were upgraded to the double variety, and the overall armor coverage actually decreased to just 14 tons of standard plate. The theme for the weapons loadout changes was short-range flexibility. The traditional right torso-mounted AC-10 autocannon was swapped out for the in-house produced Kaliyama LB-10X autocannon. With its 2 tons of allotted ammunition, it could split the ammo types and take advantage of the benefits of each on the fly. The traditional LRM launcher was upgraded to the LRM-20, set into the left arm, and fed by 2 tons of case-protected ammunition in the left torso. The SRM-4 in the left torso was left alone, but it was given a second ton of ammunition for those long campaigns where logistics lines are stretched. The 2 arm-mounted standard medium lasers were surprisingly left alone. Finally, the last addition to the ON-1M was a NARC missile beacon launcher set in the center torso and fed by 2 tons of beacons stored in the left torso. The final outcome for all these changes was a more powerful, if slightly squishier, Orion. I say squishier because even though case is added to both side torsos, it really only saves the life of the Mechwarrior in the case of an ammunition explosion. This was a likely outcome considering the BattleMech carried 8 tons of ammunition for its various weapons in those side torsos. With that many critical locations to hit, the Orion 1M Mechwarrior probably needed to think twice before wading into the fray on those front lines. Regardless of the concerns, production went ahead at full speed. Even though it had long been considered a staple of the Free Worlds League military, Kallio was not restricted from selling the mech to outside parties. Following the clan invasion, states that weren't directly impacted by the onrushing hordes of clanners were eager to supply weapons to their neighbors who were facing the onslaught. As a result, it wasn't unheard of to see the Orion 1M among the forces of the Lyrans, Comguard, and even the Draconis Combine. In fact, both the K and M variants of the Orion were spotted in the battle against the clans on Tukayyid. Damery eased up on her throttle to close the range with the incoming Spirit Cat forces. The speed came at a price. After a few long strides, her Orion's right foot slid sideways on a patch of ice hidden beneath a snowdrift. She compensated to retain balance and corrected her aim on a Shadowhawk that had wandered too close to her line of advance. The bobbling from the ice made the salvo of her extended long-range missiles fly to the right of the juking Spirit Cat, but her Gauss rifle slug, timed at just the right moment, punched a hole through the mech's already damaged torso. The resulting sympathetic detonations from deep inside blasted the shoulder-mounted light Gauss rifle barrel clean off and sent armor panels spinning off into the snow. Hunting Season, page 112, by Philip A. Lee. Fans of the Orion wouldn't have to wait long as the next variant arrived just 3 years later in 3053. Designated the Orion 1MA, the structure of the mech didn't see any changes, but the weapons loadout did. The LB-10X in the right torso was there, with its 2 tons of ammunition, and the LRM-20 in the left arm as well. However, the MA carried an Artemis 4 fire control system to aid its missile delivery. The short-range missile launcher in the left torso was upgraded to a 6-pack, and it too was aided by an Artemis 4 system. Finally, the 2 medium lasers split between the arms were swapped to medium pulse lasers. The choice between the 1M and the 1MA boils down to if you plan on using that NARC missile beacon. If you have the fire support or other missile launchers in your Lance, the 1M could be the best pick. If you're on your own and don't expect any support, the 1MA packs its own self-contained wallop. Either way, you're good to go. Now go rub some dirt on that, grab a sip off the hose, and get back out there. The next significant upgrade to the Orion would arrive in 3058 with the designation ON1MB. Clearly still modeled on the original M variant, the LRM-20 is once again found in the left arm, and the SRM-4 and the NARC missile beacon launcher are along for the ride as well. The MB's 2 adjustments to the loadout were in the upgrades of the medium lasers to the ER variety and the swap of the LB-10X to a light Gauss rifle. While I think I get what the designers were going for in giving this Orion more of a long-range 1-2 punch with the LRMs and light Gauss, in practice I wonder if the Gauss rifle can justify its existence for just 8 damage out to 25 hexes. If I were going to create a similar build, pulling that NARC launcher would buy enough mass to add a standard Gauss rifle, which easily pays for itself with 15 damage shots instead of 8. While I am not a fan of the Orion 1MB, I think it might just be one of my personal issues with the light Gauss being just way too heavy for what it can do. If the medium-range missile launcher is more your thing, in 3058 the ON1MC Orion might be the variant for you. Once again, it builds upon that M chassis with the XL engine and side torso cases. It even keeps the LB-10X autocannon in the right torso with its 2 tons of ammunition. The 2 standard medium lasers split between the arms were not touched, but the SRMs and LRMs were pulled in favor of 2 MRM launchers set into the left arm and left torso. One a 30 missile launcher and the other a 20. That was a potential 50 damage out to 15 hexes at a +1 to hit accuracy penalty. Finally, a C3 slave computer was added to the head open critical location. It's an interesting implementation of the MRM systems, and at closer ranges the Orion MC could be quite powerful. The sandpapering effect of the LB-10X combined with both MRM launchers could be fun to elicit groans from your opponent when it's time to apply damage. In 3062, the Orion 1 MD variant debuted and probably came with a free pair of air plugs, as its primary weapon was a rotary AC-5 autocannon in the coveted right torso ballistics location. Fed by only 2 tons of ammunition in the right torso, it offered up the tantalizing opportunity to do a lot of damage in a very short amount of time. Backing it up in the left arm was the traditional M-series loadout of an LRM-20, 2 medium lasers, an SRM-4, and that center torso-mounted NARC beacon launcher. If you're a huge fan of the rotary autocannons, the 1MD might be an interesting pick. I've always just loved the comical amount of ammunition on this thing. That's 9 criticals worth of ammo stored between the left and right torsos. Sure, it has case, but talk about a fireworks show once you get through that 22 points of side torso armor. Kablooey. His trained reflexes, his natural aptitudes honed by the rigid training of the Orloff Military Academy, zeroed his reticle in on the Neanderthal and crushed the firing stud for his Gauss rifle. The weapon thwanged with an electromagnetic snap as it propelled a nickel-ferrous projectile faster than the eye could see. Armor plates on the Neanderthal's torso scattered like roofing tiles torn off in a cyclone, and the mech staggered back a step as though punched. But the Regulan kept advancing, and Maximov's magazine of Gauss rifle slugs would not last forever. Hunting Season, page 202, by Philip A. Lee. In 3063, the Orion 2M was produced, which was the first significant structural change to the BattleMech since the Helm Memory Core XL engine and double heatsink upgrade. The 2M benefited from both an endosteel frame as well as 12.5 tons of ferrofibrous armor, which provided equivalent coverage as previous entries in the M series of Orions. 10 double heatsinks were deemed adequate for what was a pretty cool running machine. The 2M's primary weapons were a Gauss rifle located in the right torso, fed by 2 tons of ammunition. It was supported by an LRM-15 with Artemis 4 guidance in the left torso. That launcher was fed by 2 tons of case-protected ammunition in that torso as well. Finally, 3 medium pulse lasers were spread across the 2 arms and the left torso, providing very accurate close-range punch. While not as flashy as some of the previous Orion variants, the 2M has a classic rule of cool build to it, and the standard fusion engine and the fact that it could fire everything while on the run and not generate any excess heat makes it a valuable mech. It's a no-fuss, no-muss battle mech that would be great for a brand new player or one that had a few battles under their belt and wanted to also get a taste of that Artemis 4 system in all of its menacing glory. If it's not obvious from my tone, I really like the Orion 2M. It isn't a perfect machine, but most of the time I don't find those fun anyway. It could have been tweaked to make sure the Gauss rifle has case, and that the 16 shots for both the LRM-15 and the Gauss rifle would be a slight concern for longer battles, but in the grand scheme of things, those are minor issues. If you haven't given the 2M a glance, hopefully you will soon. Our next official variant requires a leap down the timeline to 3075, with Kallio once again returning to the drawing board to update the Orion for the battlefields of the rapidly approaching 32nd century. The resulting prototype was designated the ON3MX, and it featured some new technologies never before seen on the Orion. The internal structure for the 3MX doesn't raise any red flags, though the 300XL engine does return after the brief liberation from it with the 2M. The standard structure is there along with the 14.5 tons of standard plate armor. The mech's 10 double heatsinks would prove to be more than adequate for the design. The new gadgets show up in the 3MX's weapons loadout, starting with the improved heavy Gauss rifle, which takes up 11 critical locations split between the right and center torso of the mech. For the uninitiated, the heavy Gauss rifle fired 250 kilogram rounds that could strike a target for 22 damage. The included 4 tons of ammunition in the left torso allowed the 3MX to fire 12 times before needing to seek out logistics lines. Weighing in at 20 tons, the improved heavy Gauss rifle was a big investment, and the rest of the loadout reflects that. Backing up the big rifle at long range was an extended range LRM-10 launcher in the left arm, which was fed by 3 tons of ammunition in the left torso, 27 shots total for those who aren't familiar with the ELRMs. Finally, 2 ER medium lasers were added to the mech, 1 to each arm. The final result was an Orion that defied its traditional role as a close-range brawler and instead promised to deliver those heavy Gauss rounds at long distance, supplementing the damage with the ELRMs, which fired at a medium range at 22 hexes from the target. While functional, Kallio's leadership were unhappy with the compromises that were necessary to fit the massive improved heavy Gauss rifle into the battle mech. As we will see in a few moments, when the ON-3M went into full production, it would do so with the standard Gauss rifle instead. That day arrived in 3083 with a similar but slightly more traditional build. It looks a lot like its prototype cousin except for that Gauss rifle in the right torso. Its 2 tons of ammunition were placed into the center torso. The ELRM-15 remained in the left arm along with both ER medium lasers split between the arms. A tag system was added to the head, and in order to address the concerns about ammunition storage and that Gauss rifle capacitor exploding due to a critical hit, Case 2 was added to both side torsos. Heat isn't an issue for the Orion 3M, and the sniper role is preserved with the standard Gauss rifle. It's an interesting new look for a very old mech, though I can definitely empathize with those who feel an Orion's place is in the middle of a fray and not taking pot shots from the edge of a battle. There are 2 more official Orion variants we need to cover today, and they're a bit controversial because they're both mixed clan Inner Sphere tech battle mechs. Appropriately designated the Orion C and C2, these machines reflect the latest and greatest in 32nd century technology. Starting with the first, which is a good idea since starting with the second would be kind of weird, the Orion C arrived on the scene in 3142. It featured an endosteel frame, standard fusion engine, 10 double heatsinks, and 16 tons of clan ferrolamellar armor. I don't think we've covered any of the details on ferrolamellar before on this channel, so just for a quick rundown. For the small price of 12 critical slots, the armor reduces all incoming damage by 1 for each 5 points, or a fraction thereof, delivered per hit. It also negates the bonus effects of armor-piercing ammunition types. The ferrolamellar armor can and often does result in 1 damage attacks doing no damage at all. Say for example the LB-10X cluster munition hit. The takeaway from this is that the Orion C is a very tough nut to crack, especially with its standard fusion engine and use of Case 2 in both side torsos to protect its ammunition from sudden onset mass detonations. The right torso Gauss rifle once again makes an appearance, but in the form of a Clan Tech version that weighs in at 12 tons and takes up just 6 critical locations. This is important because almost every critical location on the mech is filled with gear, Case 2, or the ferrolamellar armor. Adding to this long-range fire, a Streak LRM-15 was installed into the left torso and fed by 2 tons of Case 2 protected ammunition. Finally, 3 Clan Tech ER medium pulse lasers were split between the arms and the left torso. Overall, the Orion C can be quite dangerous at all ranges, and even though the overall damage it can pump out isn't super impressive, the ferrolamellar armor investment means this mech will be around for quite a while, likely being a pain in the butt the entire time. If the Gauss rifle isn't your thing and sorting out the rules for ferrolamellar armor is a drag, the Orion C2 might be the better choice for your modern brawling needs. It has a debut year of 3143 and is again largely an Inner Sphere design except for the weapons, which are all Clan Tech. In the place of the large ballistics weapon, an ER large laser was added to the right torso, and it was backed up by a large pulse laser in the mech's left arm. In the left torso, an extended LRM-15 launcher sits pretty along with its 3 tons of Case 2 protected ammunition. Starting at 15 hexes, an ER medium laser in the right arm can add to the light show, and finally, a Streak SRM-4 in the left torso offers a little short-range punch. While not as hampered by ammunition issues as its sibling, the C2's 12 double heatsinks aren't up to the task of consistent fire from more than its 2 large lasers while on the run, without ending up in the red. One cannot help wondering if that Streak SRM-4 could be sacrificed to buy a couple of more heatsinks to make the ELRM launcher and the ER medium lasers a safer addition to the fray. Between the 2 options, I think I'd lean more toward the Orion C over the C2, but perhaps I'm just crazy. With the silvery flash of arcing electricity, the Gauss rifle split open down the middle, shattering the mech's primary weapon and rending armor from the inside out. Lindsay willed the Highlander mech to fall, but the Mechwarrior bravely fought the burst of feedback that ripped through their neurohelmet connections. Unfortunately, the Gauss rifle wasn't the Orion's only weapon. A cloud of smoke shot up from the battlements, and a pair of immense Arrow 4 missiles bore in on the Lao Hu. The pilot, seeing the danger they were in, backpedaled quickly but couldn't avoid the Orion's tag laser, which guided the 2 missiles to their target. Both warheads struck the Lao Hu within an instant of each other, wreathing the mech in fire, and the Orion's LRMs only fed the maelstrom. Grey Watch Protocol, page 203, by Michael J. Sierravella. Having tackled almost all of the official variants, yes, I know I missed a couple with command consoles in them, don't scream at me, I did want to take a crack at creating my very own non-canon variant of the beloved Orion. Starting all the way back with an Orion 1K, we're going to give it the gold star treatment with new endosteel and 12.5 tons of ferrofibrous armor. The fusion engine remains a standard, but it carries 11 double heatsinks. In the much coveted right torso ballistic spot, we're going to stay true to the spirit of the Orion with an LB-10X autocannon. It's reliable, tested true, and that slight boost accuracy with the cluster munitions has saved the day on more than one occasion. 2 tons of ammunition were added to the left torso along with the Mech's sole Case 2 shielding. To add to the buckshot theme, 2 snub-nosed PPCs were added to the Mech, split between the left and right arms. With 9 hexes being the golden distance for those PPCs, the Streak SRM-6 added to the left torso can also come into play at its longest range. Its 1 ton of ammunition was placed into the left torso to also benefit from the Case 2. Finally, because we can't leave home without one, an emotional support small pulse laser was added to the head critical location. Besides keeping the Mechwarrior warm on those cold evenings, it's quite useful for clearing out infantry that wander too close with those annoying satchel charges. With just 11 double heatsinks, mild heat management is required, but firing the 3 most powerful weapons while on the run still only yields +2 into the red. If you'd like to give the Orion 1MF a try, I've included the PDF record sheet for it in a Dropbox link in the video notes below. Check it out, let me know how it does. So why do we love the Orion? Of all the battle mechs in this universe, the Orion is one of the most storied. Between Kerensky, Kurita, and a good 24 mentions elsewhere in various novels and sourcebook fluff, there is no shortage of mentions for this tough cookie. It's cool that it lives in not just its original look, but also as a 2C variant, which this channel has covered a while back, but also as an inspiration for Kallio's Perseus project to create the first homegrown Omnimech for the Free Worlds League. The Orion not only benefits from a good number of variants, but also from the fact that many of them are very strong in their places on the timeline. To quote the great American philosopher Marge Simpson, I just think they're neat. But what do you think? Was I too kind to the Orion? Is it actually an awful mech and I'm clearly just in the pocket of Big Kallio? Please let me know in the comments and we'll keep that discussion going. Thank you as always for sticking around this long to hear me yap. If you haven't already, hitting that like and subscribe button is the best way to grant me the happy brain chemicals that make all this worthwhile. To those who already have and even gone one step further to become channel members or support through Ko-fi, thank you. Without you, none of this would be possible. Have a great week, and please go out and make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.